Morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Erin Kopek, and I am the Marketing Director for Higher Level. We are a workforce management resource, and today you have joined our Workplace Excellence webinar program. This program was designed to provide our clients, friends, partners, workplace information regarding HR topics, running your business, and just overall solutions to help you learn. So today we have Andrew Metcalf, an employment law attorney with Ogletree Deakins, and he'll be introduced momentarily. So this program for the higher level clients and colleagues is really to help manage your workforce changes and increase your efficiencies. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we kick it off. This call will last about 1 hour. You are in listen-only mode, so you can, if you have questions throughout the presentation, or at the end of the webinar, you can type those in your question bar there at the bottom of your GoToWebinar screen. And I will introduce our speaker. So Andrew Metcalf is an attorney in the St. Louis office of Ogletree Deakins, an international law firm representing businesses in labor and employment disputes. He consults on a daily basis with companies dealing with difficult employee relation matters. He is also a trial lawyer who defends business in lawsuits brought by employees such as discrimination claims, retaliation claims, and overtime pay claims. He is a frequent speaker to business groups on employment law matters. Thank you very much, Andrew, for presenting for us today, and I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Erin, for having me, and thank you everyone who has joined us for this discussion together today. I'm looking forward to speaking with you virtually about how to conduct workplace investigations. Before I launch into that, I want to thank Higher Level for bringing us all together today. You know, it's always refreshing to me when an organization in the human resources space takes the time to put together these presentations for their clients that maybe aren't directly related to what, you know, the organization does, but is something that we all just think would be a discussion that would benefit our clients. And I've been so impressed as I've gotten to know Higher Level over the past couple of years, and just want to thank them for bringing us together. So what is it that we're going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about workplace investigations. As I try to advance here to my second slide, Erin, I don't know if you can, there we go. Thank you, appreciate it. So I know a lot of you on the call, if you're in human resources, you already have a good idea about how to do workplace investigations. You've probably seen webinars on it before and have been saturated with blog posts about it from law firms like mine. So what I want to do today is talk about it from a perspective that you might not think of all the time, and that is my perspective as a human resources trial lawyer. So what does that mean? What is my perspective? Well, I do two things in my job. Number one, if your company gets sued in court, I go and I defend that decision in front of a judge, in front of a jury. If you are one of the 2% of cases that proceed to a trial in court, that's what I do. Tell the story. Number two, I spend a lot of my day talking on the phone like this with clients and companies about their workplace best practices and how to deal with difficult situations that might come up at work, and in particular, those situations that we think might end up in court later. So what I want to talk about today is what your investigations and documentations should look like, why you should conduct them and pay attention to this, how you should do them, when you should do them, really the basics of all the details that you need to know so that when you're preparing your investigations internally and conducting them, it's something that you and I feel comfortable later, or as comfortable as possible, that we can present to a jury in a court proceeding if we ever needed to do that. So let's jump right in. And I would encourage you to send your questions via the chat feature to Erin. I'm going to stop a little bit early and leave some time, no matter where we are in this, so that I have a chance to hear any questions you have and offer any bits of wisdom that we can. So the first question is, why are we talking about this at all? Why do we conduct investigation of workplace issues that come up? Well, I would say there's two reasons. Number one, investigations help you make the right decision. When someone comes to you with a workplace issue, how often does it happen that you go to the employee who might be the issue and the employee says, well, wait a minute, that's not true at all. That's not what happened here. You clearly didn't investigate this. We want to make sure that we investigate first. So when we approach that employee for a difficult conversation about the employee's conduct, we're confident that we're doing the right thing and that our decision is backed up by good evidence. The second reason we investigate, and again, this is from the trial lawyer's perspective, is that juries expect us to do good investigations. If you have to terminate someone, if you have to make that difficult decision, they are going to expect that you have taken the time to comprehensively look into what the issues were, gain a full understanding of those issues, give the employee an opportunity to fix those issues before the termination decision. And we can't do any of that without a good investigation. So the rule that we're going to talk about today is, when you're in doubt, conduct some level of investigation pretty much any time there's an issue that you think could lead to a termination decision, could lead to serious discipline like a performance improvement plan. It might not be a huge investigation, as we'll talk about. There's different levels of it, but we want to do some level of it under almost any serious circumstances and issues at work. The other side of the coin, when we talk about investigations, is documentation. I want you to think about this. You deal with a workplace issue today, and eventually it leads to something in the next couple of weeks where you have to terminate an employee. If that employee brings a claim against you, how long do you think it will take for that claim to end up in court, and if it's one of the few cases, end up at a trial? Is it tomorrow? Is it next month? Is it next year? The answer is none of the above. It's even longer than that. It can take years for workplace issues to manifest themselves as a lawsuit brought by the employee in court. Often there are stages in between, right? You'll get a demand letter from an employee's attorney saying that they might sue you, and then you get an EEOC charge alleging discrimination or retaliation. And then only after that, which we're already years into the process, may the employee file a lawsuit. After that, on average, it can take 1.5 to 2.5 years for a lawsuit to really go to a trial. So if you want to be a company that can defend your employment decisions, you're going to be sitting with me in a trial 4 years after you made the decision, and I'll ask you, what are the reasons you terminated this person? What led up to it? We're going to be going through things on specific days when they happened, right? All the events. Everybody has trouble remembering things like that. So documentation is our reminder. It's our Post-it note. It's what we make sure we can use so that when you're on the stand, if you ever are in that situation, you can look at the documentation and refresh your recollection about what happened and why you reached the decision that you did, and explain that to a jury or a judge in the most detail possible. Now, a lot of these cases, of course, never go that far, but we still want the documentation just so that we can be prepared in the event that you are one of the minority of cases that does proceed all the way to that level. Having that in place and knowing that we can confidently proceed to a trial is what we can use to also try to have the case dismissed or settled favorably and resolved for your organization. Documentation outside of court is also important, if you see my first bullet point there, for providing notice to employees of what your performance expectations are and what your concerns are. Juries really expect that we are going to treat our employees fairly and honestly and kindly, frankly, not coldly. There's a stereotype that corporations are these evil buildings, right? And making all these decisions that affect us as people. Well, we want to personalize those decisions. And when you draft documentation of, say, a written warning or a performance improvement plan or a performance evaluation, that is an important step in the employee relations process to make sure we are giving employees notice of what issues are and a fair opportunity to correct those issues before we as the company proceed to further corrective action all the way up to, if we really need to, a termination decision. That notice to employees is critical and really, really important to defending claims against your company later on. So let's talk about when. When do we conduct an investigation? Well, let me give you some examples. Discrimination or harassment complaints, 100% of the time, no matter what, need to have some level of investigation. Bullying or treatment of others. So, one of those complaints that sounds like discrimination or harassment, but maybe isn't linked to a protected class. We want to make sure that we are comprehensively looking into those issues as well. Substance abuse, vandalism are also issues that we want to investigate in the workplace. Performance issues, of course. When you get a complaint about an employee's performance issue, you should investigate that until you are satisfied that you have a full understanding of what the performance issue is and that it is valid and that you have examples of it so that you can intelligently confront the employee who's having the issue, put them on notice, draft good documentation of it so that we can make sure to either correct the issue or proceed with further discipline or steps to fix it. I always say pay issues are an issue that we should investigate. I talk to payroll professionals about once a year at another speech, and I talk to them about investigating issues because I think it's critical. If an employee comes to you and says, I'm not being paid correctly or I'm not receiving overtime correctly, we need to investigate to determine, is this an issue that is isolated to just one single employee, or does it affect more than one person? We want to make sure that we understand that we've corrected it, and we want to document that and everything that we're doing as accurately as possible so we can rest assured that we have paid people properly. Theft, of course, is another issue that you'll want to investigate and make sure that even if you think you have caught an employee's hand in the cookie jar, you are correct about that and done everything possible to make sure that you're right so that you have evidence to back up your decision. With employee theft and investigations, of course, we should get creative and look into this in any way that we can. Employee theft might mean looking at electronic records that might document the theft. It might mean looking at surveillance videos. It might mean looking at when people badged in and badged out of the building. Might be talking to some witnesses, which we'll talk about more. But we want to make sure before we accuse an employee of theft that we've done everything we can to be sure that we're right about it. Trade secret and non-compete violations are absolutely something you need to investigate and investigate right away whenever you have a suspicion that there is any possibility that you are experiencing an employee who is stealing what you would consider your trade secrets, or employees who you believe might be at risk of violating your non-compete violations. And I said we want to investigate that promptly internally. And here's why I say that, is because if you need to engage a lawyer to prosecute a trade secret or non-compete violation for you, a good lawyer is going to put that at the top of his or her priority list and make sure to do that quickly and right away, because time is of the essence in those cases. The best clients that I've worked with on those kinds of cases are the ones who are super responsive and get back to me immediately so that we can make sure to resolve the issue as soon as humanly possible and if necessary, go to court and get injunctive relief against an employee to get your trade secrets returned or to prevent future or further violations of your non-compete agreements. I put the word red flags at the bottom, and here's what I mean by that. Anytime you feel that there's an employee who is unhappy about your organization, who is underperforming, who might be someone that you have to make that difficult decision later to separate the employment relationship with, I think you want to be thinking about how do we investigate these issues properly, and how do we make sure that we're making the right decision here. the number one reason to do that is it's the right thing to do. We don't want to make a difficult decision with respect to someone's employment based on incorrect or inaccurate information. But number two, we don't want to make a decision and have the employee accuse us later of being wrong. Often discrimination and retaliation lawsuits really aren't about evidence of discrimination or retaliation. Employees are upset because an employer made a decision that arguably the employee thinks is wrong or the employee thinks isn't backed up by evidence. So if you have an employee who is pushing back against performance counseling that you're giving, you want to make sure that you have done everything possible to make sure that you're right and you have backup, so that if this employee brings a claim against you later, you can feel confident that you have made the right decision for your company. So who should investigate? I tend to think HR is the backbone of any company, but that's because I work in HR. But I do think HR is usually, with most of my clients, the part of the organization that is going to take the lead on investigations. Of course, you might have an internal audit department. If you're a bigger company or a federal contractor, you might have security departments or compliance departments. It is important that, I will say, for those of you in those bigger companies with multiple departments, that if you have multiple departments that are really implicated by an issue, you are all properly coordinating to make sure that the issue is investigated with a simple, streamlined, and single investigation with those multiple key players involved to the extent that they need be. What I don't want is different departments sort of investigating an issue and sort of all on different pages and creating different investigation reports. I think at the beginning of an issue, we need to decide what department and what person owns it, and what is that person's role and directive going to be. How is that person going to coordinate with others to make sure that the issue is appropriately and comprehensively investigated. But let's go through some points here of what your actual person who you task with investigating, what it is he or she really needs to pay attention to in the course of conducting an investigation. Of course, anyone who investigates should understand what the issues are that they're investigating and what the purpose of the investigation is, what it is you're trying to get an answer to, essentially, what it is you're trying to document, what rabbit hole you're trying to get to the bottom of to see what it is, the next steps that you need to do to resolve whatever the issue is that was brought to you that prompted the investigation. They need to have that bigger picture, essentially. The investigator must be able to dedicate time to the investigation. Investigate promptly is something any good lawyer will tell any of you. And we know, I know how busy all of us are in HR, and people come to us every day and say, oh, I need you to look into this immediately or do that immediately. And any project that isn't due tomorrow sometimes gets pushed by the wayside. But your investigator needs to make sure that he or she can put the time in to comprehensively and promptly do whatever it takes to get an answer. You know, if you have a subordinate responsible for investigations and tends to drag them out too long, or, you know, take weeks to schedule witness interviews and things of that sort, you're not going to be able to deal with issues in the workplace, particularly toxic issues that you want to deal with right away. We want to make sure that we're jumping on top of it. Your investigator must be detail-oriented and comprehensive. We want to make sure, again, that documentation, which I'll talk about more, is putting everything in there. And if your investigator isn't a detail-oriented person, we need to talk to him or her about how to be one whenever the investigator is talking to people and writing up those reports. The investigator needs to be really familiar with company policies. You may have company policies that describe how you investigate issues. When I'm reviewing policies, I don't necessarily recommend having that in there. I tend to think we want to, give your investigators sort of discretion to deal with issues on a case-by-case basis and not lock them into certain policies about how investigations are conducted. But outside the investigation policies, your investigators need to know your policies so that when they're investigating, if something looks like a policy violation, they can tie that into their investigation. For example, theft, right? If you're a company in a special space where theft of particular things or trade secrets is particularly important, you probably have policies on it, and your investigator needs to be aware of that and cognizant of those policies while moving through the investigation. The investigator needs to be an effective listener and interviewer. It's going to be a person who is going to be asking witnesses open-ended questions. And one of the most important parts as an investigator is to keep your mouth shut and let the person who you are talking to do the talking. The investigator also should be someone who can develop a warm rapport with the people you're investigating. You want them to tell you the truth, right? No matter what the truth is, it doesn't matter, but you want to get to the bottom of it so that you can, because we can deal with anything in the workplace, any issue, but we can't deal with it if we don't have the truth. So make sure that's the right person to do it. The investigator needs to be impartial. Any investigation we go into, we don't want to have preordained conclusions about what we think happened here. We want to be objective and figure out what can we corroborate, what can't we corroborate, and once we add all that up, what do we truly believe happened? What are our actual conclusions? Some evidence will be good for, may look good to you or may look bad, but that doesn't matter. You need to get it all so you can make the right decision. You need to maintain confidentiality throughout the investigation and be sensitive to the things that people are telling you. Your investigator is also someone who must be an effective trial witness. Anytime an investigation is conducted that leads up to an employee's termination or some other issue, there's a good possibility that if the case goes to a trial, I will say 99.9% of the time, one of our guaranteed witnesses is going to be the person who investigated the issue that led up to the termination. That person is going to need to be able to look the jury in the eye and talk about what they did, why they did it, and why they came to the conclusions that they did. My last bullet point there is outside counsel or consultant, ? So should you have outside or in-house counsel conduct investigations? Well, there's a couple things to consider with that. If you use outside counsel, there's an expense to that, right? They're going to have an hourly rate or charge a flat fee. Outside counsel can also make your investigations privileged, which means they would be only stay confidential between you and the attorney who conducts them, as long as we keep it confidential, which can be nice. Now, if you think this matter that you're investigating is something that might go to a trial later, and you have your outside counsel conduct the investigation, well, there is a possibility if that investigation does not stay privileged, if you don't want it to stay privileged and you want to use it in your defense at a trial, well, there's a good possibility that your outside counsel will be conflicted out of defending you in the case, and you'll have to find another attorney to defend you. And the reason why is your outside counsel, by conducting a non-privileged investigation, would have just become a witness in your case. So that's something to consider too. You also want to make sure your investigator is accessible later in case you want to use that person in a trial. And using outside investigators, sometimes we have more or less control over them than we would using internal people. And I say more or less for a reason. Internal people leave companies. We do it all the time, right? So there's always a possibility you say, oh, I'm going to use this person in-house to investigate this serious issue, and then the person retires or goes to another job or another career. And then if we want to use that person at trial, they're just a little less accessible to us than they might have been before. Of course, outside consultants, don't work for you, so you don't have complete control over them. But these are all things to consider. Generally, if issues are high up enough in the organization or serious enough, or we feel for one reason or another that our internal resources are maybe too tied up or unavailable, or aren't ideal to conduct an adequate investigation at the time the issue comes up, it's at those points that I sometimes point clients to an outside consultant and say, maybe the best solution here is to have someone else look into this, draft up an impartial outside investigation report so that we can figure out what is it that we need to do next to resolve the issue that's come to us. So let's talk about how to investigate. This is the bread and butter of the presentation. And take a deep breath, because there is no one-size-fits-all approach to any investigation that you conduct in your workplace. They're all going to be a little bit different. And because of that, there's really no right or wrong answer to the question, how do you conduct an investigation? But you do want to think about that up front when any issue, big or small, comes to you in the workplace. You're going to want to determine the scope of your investigation. And I recommend, even for small issues, making a plan and write down what it is you're going to do to investigate. So for example, you have an employee come to you and complain that a supervisor is really harsh and rash in communications, and this employee really feels mistreated by it and is upset about it. Well, what are you going to do? First, you're going to talk to that employee right there in the meeting. You're going to try to get as many specific examples as you can. Of course, if this is behavior that you've seen before, you already have one witness to it, and you should document what your experience has been that is consistent or inconsistent with what the employee is telling you. But the next step, especially if you don't have any personal firsthand knowledge of what you're dealing with, the next step is either going to be further investigating by talking to the employee who's being complained about to get that person's side of the story, or it might be talking to other employees and saying, hey, is this an issue here? Is this something, what have you experienced working under the supervisor? We just want to make sure we have a full understanding of, what it's like to perform your job duties in this department. We want to do that so we get the full story and we know how to address the issue, or even if we need to address it. And we want to do that and come to those conclusions before we do something like issue a written warning or further discipline. So I recommend making a plan up front. Before you dive into too much in your investigation, I always think, are there documents or other things that you should be reviewing to gain a full understanding of the issue that's been brought to you? I gave the example of theft earlier, but how about my example of rash communications, right? That's something employees complain about all the time. What kind of documents can you review if an employee comes to you and says, gosh, this employee communicates with us and really creates a toxic work environment because the communications just really make us feel really uncomfortable and unwelcome here and kind of awkward, and we'd like it to stop. Well, what kind of communications could you review, right? That's kind of an amorphous issue. It might be hard to investigate. Well, not so. I mean, you can ask the employee who's complaining, does this ever happen over email, right? Does this person ever send emails that are kind of unduly harsh and that, we might consider harassment or bullying, or just something that makes the workplace uncomfortable that we want to deal with? Let's get those emails, right? If we want this employee to improve, or we're going to talk to about this, we want to make sure that we can talk to them about those specific ones and say, look, this is an example of a communication issue that we don't think meets expectations, and that we want to make sure in the future, this is how you might say it to avoid causing unrest at our company and make sure that we're as welcome as possible to everyone. Think about how quickly the investigation should be completed, depending on what your issues are. Think about who is going to be interviewed and in what order. Are you going to talk to the accused first and foremost to get that person's side of the story? Do you think you need to talk to other witnesses first to fully understand their perspective on what's happening? It's going to be different depending on what the issues are, right? What issues must be covered? Investigations have different issues, and more issues pop up during the investigation that you might need to kind of conduct a little side investigation, right? It comes up in in bullying and harassment investigations all the time, where an employee might come to you and say, my supervisor is harassing me and holding me to expectations that others aren't held to. And then you go to the supervisor, and the supervisor says, no, this employee is totally not meeting expectations, and made this complaint right after I gave her a performance improvement plan. Well, to an extent, that is an issue that requires a little bit of investigation from you before you can come to a conclusion about who's right and who's wrong. I mean, if an employee is accusing a supervisor of harassment, we might want to ask other employees, again, do you feel this in the department, and document those conversations. At the same time, we need to investigate not only the employee's complaint, but the supervisor's complaint that this employee is underperforming. So keep that in mind as you move forward with it. Document your plan and what it is you're doing at every step of the way. And this is when I'll say, when you document, you really need to pretend like, the simplest way to do it is to pretend like you are keeping a diary and writing down, just without getting too lengthy about it, a summary of what is happening, when it's happening, and who is there. And we'll talk a little bit more about documentation a little later. But as a quick aside, I want to point out that my perspective on this as a trial lawyer is important, because courts take notice of whether your investigations are good or whether they are bad. Take this example. This was from a real case where a court was writing up an opinion dismissing a case and really put the employer's investigation under the microscope and said the investigation was thorough and transparent. The investigators interviewed each and every person involved in the incident, 14 in all. They reviewed surveillance footage.
This is Erin, everyone. I am checking in with Andrew. It looks like we may have lost him, so let's give him a couple more minutes to sign back in. I cannot hear him either. So just 1 second. I apologize for the delay.
Hey, can everybody hear me again? I'm sorry about that. I think I dropped.
Yes, we can hear you now.
I'm sorry about that. Where I left off, I think, is I was saying that courts take notice of what your investigations look like. So this is an example on this slide of one where a court thought it was a good investigation. But on the other hand, sometimes an investigation, when it doesn't go the way we want it to, a court might criticize it. So here's another one where a court was looking at, had a jury trial and was talking about what the employer's investigation looked like during the jury trial. And the court said the jury heard about what the employer did and did not do. Two things stand out. First, the jury heard the employer did not interview on the plaintiff's list 19 persons he suspected as perpetrators of the incident. The employer's investigator should talk to some of those people.
Second, the employer did not install a single surveillance camera. So you can see, right, what happened here, what clearly led up to this case and this issue was an issue came before this company, this HR department probably, and the employee who was being complained about gave a list and said, hey, talk to these people. They're going to tell you I am not doing these things that I am being accused of doing. And rather than look into that and follow down that path, the employer didn't do that. And instead, it looks like in this case, got hit for it. So, you know, an example I sort of gave earlier is, you know, someone complaining to you that someone else has a negative attitude at company meetings, someone's always, you know, making skeptical comments or rejecting ideas that other people bring up and not considering those ideas fairly. That's sort of a run-of-the-mill complaint that we get all the time in HR, right? Well, let's think about what do we ask the employee who complains in the initial meeting? And I think the most important thing is to get specific examples of what exactly the conduct is. What is it? When does it happen? How often does it happen? Who else witnesses it? Who else could we talk to see if it's actually happening or not? And kind of just ask those open-ended questions to get the full story from the person who is complaining. What documents do we get? Well, if it's an investigation about something like a communication issue, there might be memos or emails or texts or something else that memorializes what this communication issue is, or other emails that other employees have sent about it. We're going to want to get those so that we fully understand it. Well, who do we talk to next? Well, if it's something as simple as this, we might just go straight to the person accused, for lack of a better word, and confront that person about it and say, you know, from your perspective, is this happening? If the person admits they can improve, we just talk about how they can improve, how we should phrase things in the future to make the workplace more welcoming to everyone, and then monitor the issue going forward. Of course, if they deny this, at that point, we might want to go talk to other people to fully investigate, right? And document who we've talked to, what they've said, what they've told us about how this employee communicates. How do we document what we're doing? Well, it might have cut off right when I said it, but I think it's important to keep documentation like it's a diary. So we're going to write down who we're talking to, when we're talking to them, and what it is we're doing next if we corroborate what it is. Key documents in investigations are usually personnel files, your policies, surveillance, reports. You know, for example, like reports documenting when people badge in and out of your building, if an issue is whether someone is leaving early or something like that. And emails, of course, are documenting everything we do. So you should use those to your advantage. Conducting interviews, think carefully about the preparation and order. In those interviews, put your witnesses at ease. I recommend taking notes during interviews, and if your handwriting is as messy as mine, they won't look very good. But then go back and type up your notes, and all you have to do is type up what you said and what the interviewee said in response in a summary format. Include direct quotes if some of that is particularly salient. But I put this slide in because I think anytime you're conducting an interview, if you can't think of questions to ask, just think of all the questions in the English language, because guess what? There aren't that many. The only questions we really ask are who, what, where, when, why, how. And usually, if you're having trouble coming up with questions in an interview, you can think of sort of one of those prompts, and it will get you to a question. What happened? When did it happen? When has it happened on other occasions? Where did it happen? Who witnessed it? Why did it happen? What led up to all this? Is there something that instigated it? How did it all go down? Keeping those questions in mind can really help you build a full investigation. You know, sometimes we forget to ask who witnessed this, and we definitely don't want to forget that. My advice, though, in those interviews is to start broadly and then get narrower with your questions. Get the people talking. Be a good listener. I think a good question to ask when someone complains to you about something is, how do you want this issue to be resolved? And I think that I put that in there because I think it's something we don't ask enough. Often one employee will complain about another. And I think it's nice to get that complainant's perspective about how they want the issue to be resolved. Sometimes they will say, I want that person fired, or I want that person reprimanded and something documented in the file. Well, they might not necessarily have a say in whether that happens, but if we decide to resolve the issue in a different way, I think we want to be able to explain why it is we didn't go with what they wanted, but why we think we are doing something that is going to ultimately resolve the issue. Conclude every investigation with, is that all? Or is there anything else you think I should know about this? That should be the last question in pretty much any investigation conducted. Ask about witnesses. Again, did anyone else see this? Is there anyone else you think I should talk to? Particularly when you're talking to someone who is accused of something, who is denying it. I think it's nice to say to that person, look, is there anyone else you think I should talk to? Because either you will go to those people and they're hopefully going to corroborate one side of the story and allow you to come to some reasonable conclusions about what it has happened. Feel free to document credibility. It's okay to come to those conclusions. I want you to be impartial. But if there's reasons why you think one person is more credible than another, for example, say you've gotten 5 complaints and the person still denies it, well, 5 against 1, you might come to a reasonable conclusion there, right? So that's fine. Dealing with issues that come up during the investigation, again, if you have side issues come up, if other issues that come up that need to be investigated, don't push those under the rug. I see that all too often, right? We're worried about the first complaint that came to us. We're focusing on that. We're doing a good job really digging into it. And then we sort of forget to look into maybe some of the other issues that came up in other witness interviews or that the accused person brings up. Don't push those under the rug. Let's look into them. Let's figure out what the full story is. Avoid bias is probably the number one thing to think about when conducting an investigation. And, bias is something we all have, whether we like it or not. It is just the process of our brains filling in gaps based on the limited information that we have. But I want you to be unbiased in your investigation. You should be gathering evidence that supports the conclusions that you think you're coming to, but also evidence that contradicts it. Don't worry about that. No investigation or situation at work or anywhere in life is crystal 100% clear, like smoking gun. We know exactly what happened and why it happened. Not all the needles are going to point in the same direction when you've conducted an investigation. I love employer investigations that maybe have facts in there that we think are bad, right? Because it shows you were honest when you conducted the investigation. And that is the number one most important thing. Not that we create, some biased report that just kind of comes to the conclusion that, we absolutely positively needed to make the decision that we did. It's never that crystal clear cut. And your investigation should reflect that situations at work tend to get complicated. So let's talk about how to conclude an investigation. You want to close the loop with the person who complained by talking to them about what it is you're going to do next. Obviously, you need to be sensitive about what you learned during the investigation and keep some of that confidential and on a need to know. And often it might be you didn't substantiate a complaint, but you think 2 employees are working so poorly together and that this work environment has become so strained, you want to do something anyway to fix the situation and make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. And you absolutely should. So your investigation report might say, look, this is a he said, she said situation. I can't really conclude what happened based on the evidence I have. But, we do want to make sure that these employees can work together well in the future. And, because of that, we're going to limit their contact maybe for a while, temporarily or permanently, in this way and that way and the other way to try and prevent this issue from coming up again in the future. What are you going to do to ensure that there's no retaliation? Well, I think it's nice after an employee complains, put a little calendar invitation, send it to yourself, a calendar reminder that you're going to go back and you're going to talk to the person who complained every 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it is, 2 weeks, and ask maybe via email or in person, hey, I wanted to make sure that there were no other issues like the ones we talked about a couple weeks ago. Is there anything I should know or anything you want to talk about? They'll either say yes, and you have something to talk about and look into and counsel them on and possibly investigate, or they'll say no. And then what do you want to do? You want to create documentation that says, on this date, I talked to this person at this time, and they said this, right? And put all the information in there to make sure that we can document that we did that and remember that we did that 4 years from now. Written reports should reflect the comprehensiveness of your investigation. I want them to explain, as I said, kind of like a diary. What date did everything happen? What exactly happened? Someone came to your office and complained about this, that, and the other thing. You responded asking for specific examples. They said this, that, the other thing. I want first and last names in documentation that you create, saying, Jane complained about Chris. Well, that could be a lot of people in your organization. Put it this way. Do you want to pay me later as your attorney to have to go back, reinvestigate, and figure all this stuff out on one hand? Or would you rather have that all in documentation so that if you're one of the unlucky ones and you have to defend your decision in some type of claim or litigation later, you can say, oh, Andrew, I've got this. Here, take a look at my investigation report. It explains briefly what happened, when it happened, what all of our steps were, what our plan was, how it all worked out, what witnesses told us as we went through it. So look at that first, and you're going to really understand the case. Or do you want to pay me to have to call you and say, hey, you didn't put last names in here. I need to talk. I don't know who these people are. I need to know what their names and job titles are. Make our lives easy by putting all that information in right up front. Okay, so even though we got cut off for a minute, I still managed to make it through all my slides with about 13 minutes on the clock to answer any questions you have and talk about investigation best practices. Of course, remember that you should only be asking hypothetical questions. I can't give specific legal advice about specific situations because you want to make sure that you're having those conversations privileged with whoever your good workplace attorney is, somebody like me, right? So Aaron, I'm going to turn it back to you if people have any questions, and if not, I'll be happy to give some more pointers for a couple minutes as we wrap up.
Got it. Great information, Andrew. So I do not see any questions. So if anyone has questions, feel free to type those in your question toolbar, and we will give you a couple minutes to see if anything's coming in before we wrap up.
Yeah, take the chance to get the advice now, guys, while it's free, thanks to Higher Level, bringing us all together. As closing, I will say, whatever your question is, whenever you're conducting an investigation, I think just be as comprehensive as possible. And remember that there's no wrong answer. Like, there's a lot of different ways to investigate things. There's a lot of different order you can talk to people, a lot of different documentation you can gather, a lot of different ways that you can discipline an employee if someone isn't meeting expectations, and you determine that after an investigation. So keep that in mind as you go through it. I'll say too, with dealing with any workplace issue, I give another talk about honesty in the workplace, and I always say there are 3 steps to dealing with any issue, honestly. That's number 1, setting honest expectations with employees and communicating it to them very clearly. Number 2, investigating when someone doesn't meet those, when you think or suspect someone's not meeting those expectations, doing what you need to do to get to the truth as best as you possibly can. And then number 3, being honest with people when your investigation reveals that someone has not met expectations. We want to make sure that we are giving employees a chance to improve, a chance to be on notice of what the issues are. no matter what happens at work, being fair to people is one of the best things that I love showing a jury when we have to present a jury trial. In the few cases where we do, I really like humanizing us and saying, look, we made the most honest, fair decision that we could. We did our very best with the resources we had. We looked into everything we could. We documented it really well. And then only after putting the employee on notice of it and giving the employee a chance to improve, we made the decision that we had to. And that decision made our workplace a better place. If you work there, you would be happy with the decision that we made. Any other questions as we come to the last few minutes here?
Andrew, I'll kind of piggyback on that. So I definitely agree with all the points that you made, but one thing that we take pride in at a higher level with both supporting our clients and our, obviously, candidates and job seekers is just the documentation piece. It's so important to take the time to thorough note something and, you know, be specific because that will come back to provide great benefit for you. We've seen it time and time again. So our certified staffing team members and recruiters, that's, you know, one of the great attributes that they have is being able to, like you said, provide that honest documentation and a fair workplace. So I think that's really that's our standard. So.
Yeah, and to bookend what I said from the very beginning, send a note to Erin. I'm sure higher level will be following up with a lot of you who they've worked with before, but send a note thanking her for putting this together because, again, it's a testament to how involved they are in our region and how much they care about making sure that they aren't just helping you find the right people for your workplace and helping you accomplish your business goals, but they truly care about the 360-degree view of your entire organization. My email's on there. I'm Andrew Metcalf. I'm at Ogletree. Again, I'm a workplace trial lawyer. Feel free to contact me anytime. Hit me up on LinkedIn. And I hope to meet a lot of you in person if we haven't met before. I'm a frequent speaker. I prefer doing it in person when we actually get to chat face-to-face. But again, thank you to Higher Level for putting this together. Erin, I'll turn it back to you to conclude.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, again, and thank you, everyone, for spending your morning with us. Feel free to email either Andrew or myself, and we could get you more information. We are recording this session, and we'll be placing it on our YouTube channel, the Higher Level YouTube channel. But we will follow up to provide that information. So we do these sessions on a monthly basis, and our next session will be Wednesday, March 28th. And one of my internal colleagues, Beth Reichert, our client support specialist within our payroll and human capital management division, she will be discussing with us basically the pros and the 5 ways to utilize your human capital management system to help manage employees, morale, that type of thing. So if you're interested, shoot me an email, hello@higherlevel.com. The email is on the screen, and we will make sure we get you registered. That will be another very insightful and great presentation coming up in March. So I appreciate it again, and thank you, Andrew. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.